All right. Hello. Welcome back to another Classic Comics Trek Talk live stream where I take a look at one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series. Today, we're taking a look at episode 60 in production order, and the children shall lead. All right. We got here. Hello, Rogues1138. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here again. Always appreciate it. Okay. And the children shall lead. Yeah. I don't think there are many who would say this is one of Star Trek's better episodes, although there are a few, as we'll see as I get into the behind the scenes stuff. Oh, and Rogue says, great intro. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I am quite fond of it. I basically just I took the that kind of collage, of images from the trailer for Star Trek 6. It was that was part of the trailer for the sixth Star Trek film, and then I found some free use music that sounded appropriate that I put over it. And I do have a couple of other versions. I don't use them very often though. I think that one just sounds better overall. Okay, so this episode was written by Edward J. Lasco and directed by Marvin Chomsky. This is from an NBC press release issued September 10th, 1968. Children appearing unconcerned at the death of their parents are beamed aboard the USS Enterprise and begin taking over the minds of the crew as Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and Dr. McCoy attempt to battle an unseen force on the Star Trek episode And the Children Shall Lead. Melvin Belli, the prominent lawyer, makes his acting debut as Gorgon, joining guest stars Craig Hundley and James Wellman, who portray children of the deceased adult colony on the planet Triacus and are plotting to take over the universe. Gorgon appears only when summoned by the mysterious chant of the children, who exercises evil control over their actions and their minds. As a TV Guide close-up listing tells us, Gorgon uses the children to unleash the beast in the human soul. And we all have a beast of our own. Kirk's beast, his overwhelming fear, is losing his ability to command. Spock's is losing the discipline of his mind. Uhura's is losing her youth and beauty. Sulu's is losing his perception of reality. And Chekhov's is losing his ability to fulfill his duty as a result of his inexperience. The dual themes tackled here are seduction and the manipulation of youth. In this case, it happens as something similar to demonic possession and the facing of one's greatest fears, often more difficult for adults than for children. And hail Lord Thoth. Hey, good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here. Okay, so the intentions were good. In fact, writer, producer, director, and many in the cast believed at the time they were collaborating to make a top-notch episode. 3 years before the publication of William Peter Blatty's novel The Exorcist, Star Trek did its own story of children being corrupted by an evil influence. Films such as Village of the Damned in 1960 and its sequel Children of the Damned may have helped to inspire some of what was seen here, as did the 1958 film The Space Children. But much about And the Children Shall Lead is original, with elements well in place for an emotionally engaging and horrific drama. And the Children Shall Lead also makes a comment on the vulnerability of youth and its tendency to follow the lead of charismatic predators, or if you will, con artists, pedophiles, pushers, and even rock and rollers, rappers, and an assortment of spoiled celebrities. These are the ones who seem to easily gain the trust of the innocent mind. This commentary is implied in various passages of dialogue, such as Spock saying that evil seeks to maintain itself in power by the suppression of truth. And McCoy says, or the misleading of innocence. And Kirk says, innocence misled. I wonder, is it the power of evil to attract willing followers? There are many inspired moments within the story. The idea of Kirk beaming two security men to a planet that the Enterprise no longer orbits and therefore sending them to their deaths, Uhura seeing herself as old and dying, Sulu on a frightening mental disruption like a drug user's bad trip, scared out of his wits, Kirk unable to communicate with his crew and therefore unable to command. These are all good ideas, and the architects of And the Children Shall Leave deserve praise for utilizing the regular cast in unique, challenging, and memorable ways. But a good idea or collection of ideas cannot make for a successful motion picture or television episode when the execution is so flawed. Following some of the decisions made, we can take a look at the following. Gene Roddenberry assigned this script to a writer who had no prior Star Trek experience, even after being warned by one of his assistants that the writer, had a spotty reputation. The story selected, although a good one, was never going to be allowed to develop to its full potential due to network restrictions. With evil, manipulative children and mass suicide, the censors would have much to say about this and remove a lot of the plot points and water down the dialogue. Roddenberry picked a producer, Fred Freiberger, who had no prior experience with Star Trek. Then, by the time filming commenced, he had effectively abandoned him. With Roddenberry's approval, that producer, Freiberger, hired a story editor who also had no past experience with the show or with science fiction, and then loaded him up with so much work that he had to let his well-trained ears go somewhat deaf when giving out or when giving a script a quick polish. Fred Freiberger and Robert Justman chose a director with no prior Star Trek experience who, being new to the post, was not going to have much influence over the series regulars, some of whom already had displayed a tendency to emote rather than act when too many exclamation points were typed into the script. And this material came with a lot of exclamation points. Freiberger hired a novice and not very good actor to play the story's main villain. And some budget cutting choices were made by the producers, proving the old adage, penny wise and dollar foolish. Now, writer Edward J. Lasko had been working in TV for we'll stop there and we'll go ahead and get into the episode itself. And I'll come back to this stuff. Yeah. All right. So we start out on a planet called Triacus. And there is a Federation research team on this planet studying the planet. And they send out a distress signal. And the Enterprise is responding. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy beam down to the planet. And they find the research team dead. Oh, hey, RT and Z. Good to see you, man. He says, hey, mate, not one of the better TOS episodes. Nimoy hated it, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he wasn't fond of it. In fact, not many were. I don't think many people were. Although Shatner liked it, apparently. It's definitely not one of my favorites. But yeah, they beam down and they find the entire research team dead. Well, except for the leader. What's his name? I forget the guy's name now. I'll find it here in a second. Hold on, just let me take a drink of water. Okay. What is this guy's name? It's like Lawrence or something like that. I can't find it right now. But anyway, they find him alive, but he, when they try to communicate with him, he doesn't really respond, and then he abruptly dies. And when they investigate, they find that it appears that the colonists or the research team all poisoned themselves, in effect committing mass suicide. Then they hear the sound of children playing, and a group of kids of 5 children come onto the scene playing tag or running around, and they seem completely unconcerned and oblivious to all the dead bodies around them. But they do seem to be puzzled by the landing party's presence. And they invite Kirk and the others to play with them, and then they start playing Ring Around the Rosie around Kirk. Now, later, they bury the research team. And again, written by Edward Lasco, directed by Marvin Chomsky. And this is one of the first things about the episode is that they have these people who've all committed suicide, evidently, and then they just do this hasty burial. And and where'd these headstones come from, for that matter? You think that they would take the bodies up to the Enterprise and have autopsies done to confirm the cause of death, and that sort of thing. But no, there's just this hasty burial that's done. And then in the middle of the burial service, again, the kids just break away and decide to start playing, and they seem to be completely unconcerned about the fact that their parents are all dead. Now, McCoy suggests that the children are suffering from some sort of, traumatic emotional shock, and they're in denial because of that, and this is their way of coping with what happened, basically coping with their grief. And Spock notes that humans do have a talent for believing the things that they want to believe, and ignoring reality. And Kirk says, "Yeah, that may be true, but even he has a hard time believing that they could do it to this extent." And Kirk wants to question the children, but McCoy says that forcing them to confront what happened could lead them into a severe emotional shock, and he cautions against it until they can have further examination done. So McCoy beams up to the ship with the kids, while Kirk and Spock remain behind. And Spock suggests, and again, this is one of the issues with the episode, is Spock suggests that this mass suicide may have been induced by some sort of outside force. I mean, he has zero evidence to back this up. I mean, I don't know where he's getting that from. There's no evidence to support it, but he suggests it anyway, and really can't explain why the children were unaffected. I don't know. Him making this claim, it seems very un-Spock-like to me, though he doesn't have any evidence, doesn't have any real proof to support this. He just sort of, and this is one of the problems with the episode, is Spock says a lot of things, that really aren't fitting to him. And when I get into the behind the scenes stuff, I'll talk about this more. Because again, the writer who was writing this, he had never written Star Trek or really written much science fiction. Now, Spock says he's getting some unusual readings on his tricorder from a cave nearby. So they enter the cave to take a look around, and while they're in the cave, Kirk suddenly becomes he's overcome with a sudden sense of anxiety and dread and anxiousness. Spock says he doesn't feel anything, but eventually Kirk just flees the cave because he just can't stand it. Now, once he leaves the cave and comes back out, he feels better immediately. And let's see. Yeah, yeah, after leaving the cave, he says he feels fine. So they eventually beam up to the ship. Now, later on the Enterprise, McCoy says that the children have been examined and he can't find anything wrong with them physically, but they continue to behave as if nothing is wrong or anything unusual has happened. Now, again, Kirk wants to question them, but McCoy wants to wait until they can get to a starbase and have a psychiatrist who is a child specialist uh, examine them first. But I'm sorry, Kirk wants answers, and reluctantly, McCoy allows him to do it. So the kids are in the recreation deck, and Kirk goes there to see them, and so they're having ice cream. And he questions them, and he asks them if they liked it on Triacus, and they say that they didn't. They complain that their parents liked it, though. And one says that parents like stupid things, and Nurse Chapel tells them that their parents cared about them, but the little girl scoffs at that idea, and that's the girl Mary is her name. And again, Kirk asks if they missed Triacus and if they missed their parents. And for a moment, the kids seem uncertain, but then they just start a chant of busy, 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 and they start playing again, running around, playing tag, and that sort of thing. Then they ask if they can have more ice cream, and Kirk says that they've had enough. And the oldest boy, Tommy, tells the others, "See, I told you so." And Kirk asks Chapel to take them to their quarters, but then he tells the older boy, Tommy, and that's Tommy right there with the kind of red hair, to stay behind. So he starts talking with Tommy, and he asks if Tommy had seen his father earlier in the day, and his father is the one that they found still alive. He was like the team leader who died. Lawrence, again, I think that was his name. And Tommy says that he did, and Kirk asks if he's upset, and or if his father was upset. Rather, he asks, was your father upset about anything? And he says that his father was always upset, and he says that Kirk seems upset too. And Kirk says he isn't upset, and asks if I was upset with you, then why would I bring you here? And the boy says, you adults always have your reasons for doing things. And he asks if the boy misses Triacus, and he says no. And Kirk asks if he's upset about leaving his parents behind, and he says that his parents love Triacus and they'll be happier staying there. They're happy now. Again, showing complete unconcern for his parents being dead. Now, after he sends the boy on his way, he orders that a guard be placed on the kids, basically to keep an eye on them. I mean, it doesn't really seem like he's concerned about their danger to the ship. I mean, I'm guessing it's more just he doesn't want them running around loose, and getting underfoot or, messing with equipment or anything. At least that's the impression I have. Now, later, the kids are in their quarters and they link hands and they start to recite a chant. Hail, hail, fire and snow. Call the angel, we will go. Far away for to see, friendly angel, come to me. And after they finish the chant, a glowing figure appears. And he tells the children that they have done well, that they have done what needed to be done. He tells them that Kirk will try to take them to the nearest starbase, but he tells them not to let that happen. He wants them to go to a planet called Marcus 12, saying that this is a better destination since it is inhabited by millions of people, and these people will join them and become their friends. And the people who don't become their friends will be their enemies, and then they'll just have to do the same thing to them that they did to their enemies on Triacus, their enemies meaning the parents. And then after they join with their new friends on Marcus 12, they will be invincible and no one will be able to tell them what to do or where to go or what they can eat or when to go to bed. And to do this, he says they will need to take control of the Enterprise, and he tells them that they know what to do. Now, on the bridge, uh, Spock is going through some of the log tapes from the research team. And the team leader, Professor Lawrence, I think that's his name, says that since arriving on Triacus, he has been filled with a sense of unease. And the rest of the team is feeling it too, but the children don't seem to be affected. Then Spock shows another log entry where he says that they found evidence of a civilization which existed there long ago, and that this civilization experienced some sort of catastrophe. And in order to hide from it, they took shelter in the caves around the planet. Now, as they're watching this, Tommy comes onto the bridge and he sees them listening to the log tapes. And so he makes this sort of pumping gesture with his fist. And when he does that, this seems to cause some sort of interference and the tapes stop playing. Now, after that, Kirk sees Tommy, and let's see. Yeah, so then Tommy asks Kirk to take them all to Marcus 12. Kirk says that they'll have to go to a star base instead, and Tommy says he should go to Marcus 12 because he has family there. But Kirk says that Marcus 12 is too far outside of their patrol area. So then he and Spock leave. Tommy asks to be allowed to stay on the bridge for a while, and Kirk says okay, but he tells Mr. Leslie to, and that's Leslie right back there, Eddie Paskey, who I've talked about before. He's supposed to keep an eye on Tommy. And this is another thing, is that he repeatedly uses this, this magic power, whatever you want to call it. And Leslie watches him doing this repeatedly and doesn't respond at all. So again, it's kind of like his lack of a reaction is odd. I kind of rationalize it by saying that Tommy has already used the power on him, so he's already kind of mesmerized. At least that's how I justify it. I don't know if that was really supposed to be the case or not. So he, again, he shakes his fist at Sulu, and then Sulu seems to become drowsy, and then he alters the Enterprise's instruments and takes the Enterprise out of orbit around Triacus and heads off into space, presumably heading towards Marcus 12. But when he looks at the view screen, Sulu still sees Triacus as if there's still an orbit around it. And then Mary, the little girl, comes on the bridge, and of course she knows what he's done, and so they're happy because now they're going to Marcus 12, even though they're out in space now, because this is what's really on the screen. And then Uhura, she looks up and she sees that they're not in orbit around Triacus anymore, and so she tells Sulu, "Hey, you're off course." But then Tommy shakes his fist at her, and it sort of puts a whammy on her too, and now she sees Triacus too, and so she then calms down and forgets about it because she thinks it's not important. Now, down in the auxiliary control room, this little boy, and his name is Don, I believe. So he does the fist shaking thing at these red shirts that are working in the control room. Then Scotty shows up. Then Scotty sees that they're off course, and he tells this guy here to, adjust his instruments. And the red shirt says, we're on course. We're where we're supposed to be. So then he tries to physically adjust the instruments himself. But then he and this other red shirt, they attack Scotty and beat the crap out of him, subdue him. Now in Kirk's quarters, they continue watching the log tapes. And Dr. McCoy has joined them. And again, Professor Lawrence says that the team leader, he says that some sort of outside influence has been forcing him to do things that don't make any sense, such as requesting Starfleet send up transport to take them away from the planet, even though they weren't planning to leave. He then says they're under some sort of alien influence and that they must destroy themselves or, commit suicide. Now, Spock suggests that something clearly didn't want them warning anyone about what was happening, and he says that some alien force may be trying to cover up the truth. And it's at this point that McCoy makes a comment about evil misleading the innocent, and then Kirk wonders if the children have had any involvement in what happened. So then he asks Spock what is known about the planet of Triacus, and Spock says that in the past, Triacus was home to a race of marauders who attacked several planets in the surrounding systems. Now, eventually, the people they were terrorizing turned on them and they were wiped out. But then he says that there's a legend that says that the evil on Triacus may eventually be awakened and returned. And again, this is just like a very un-Spock like thing for him to indulge in this kind of superstition or folklore. It doesn't really seem like him. Now, after discussing the matter further, Kirk decides he wants to beam back down to Triacus and investigate further. Okay, and Rogues1138 says, I remember as a child that this episode was rather creepy. Yeah, this was one of the first episodes I saw too, as a kid. Yeah, man, I think I remember it being a little creepy at the time. The main thing I remember is we'll get to it, but the image of all the knives or daggers on the screen, I always remember that in my mind. That's the main thing I remember from this episode. Okay, now he's got a security detachment down on the planet already, so he decides it's time to switch them out. So he orders another security detachment to the transporter room. Then they go to the transporter room too, and so he has the red shirts beam down ahead of them, which is convenient considering what happens. So they beam down, but of course, so then after they beam down, Kirk orders that the team that was already down there be beamed up, but the red shirt operating the teletransport controls can't lock onto them. So then Spock steps in, and then he announces that they're no longer in orbit around Triacus. And so they look at a view screen. I guess I didn't include it, but there's a view screen that they look at, and they see that they're in open space and not over the planet. And of course, then they realize that these two guys that they sent down to Triacus, they basically just beamed them out into the vacuum of space, and they're dead now. So then he contacts the bridge and tells Sulu, look, you're off course. You're supposed to be orbiting Triacus. And of course, Sulu says, yeah, we're on in orbit. We're where we're supposed to be. And Kirk insists that he is not. And then he says he's on his way to the bridge. And Kirk comes back to the bridge. Now, as he comes back to the bridge, the children are again doing their little chant. And then the glowing figure again appears. And the character is called Gorgon. That's his name. And again, this is one of the things with this episode because they never say his name. He never says what his name is, and the kids never call him that. But later in the episode, towards the end, Kirk addresses him as Gorgon, even though he was never told Gorgon's name. So obviously something got cut out somewhere along the way. And I don't know if it was filmed and then cut out in editing, to make it short enough, or if it got cut out of the script some point and it was just a screw up. I don't know. And the figure urges the children to maintain control of the ship. And boy, you really the the budget cutting I think really shows in this episode. I mean, look at this outfit. Doth mother know you weareth her drapes? I mean, this looks awful. This is literally like upholstery from your grandma's couch that they just turned into a costume. It just looks terrible. But yeah, he urges the children to maintain control of the ship and tells them to make sure he gets to Marcus 12 and not to let anyone stop them. And, I really couldn't capture it here in the episode, but, he does all this and then he sort of fades away and then everyone just sort of goes back to about their business like nothing happened. It's like, what? Doesn't anyone have any questions about this glowing guy? So, Kirk, or let me see. Yeah, so Kirk tells Sulu to ignore what he sees on the screen and set a course for Starbase 4. But then Tommy gestures. He does the fist shaking thing again. And then Sulu sees this tunnel of daggers here. And this is the thing I always remember from this episode. Because, I don't know, it's a pretty memorable visual, I think. So basically, Sulu was terrified, and he's afraid that if he changes course or alters the ship's course in any way, the Enterprise will be destroyed. So he refuses to change course. So then Kirk tells Uhura to contact Starfleet and tell them what is happening, but then she freaks out because, again, Tommy sort of shakes his fist at her, and now she sees herself as very old and dying, and she sort of starts freaking out. And then he tells Spock to contact Starfleet instead, but Spock insists that everything is normal and there's no need to call them. And then he tells Mr. Leslie here to take Spock and Uhura to their quarters. But when he makes or speaks the orders, Leslie hears Kirk's dialogue is just unintelligible gibberish. And it's actually the dialogue was being run backwards, so he's talking backwards. But basically, he's speaking to him, and it doesn't make any sense. And Leslie doesn't react at all. He just sort of stares blank-faced. Again, I'd like to think that he's just already sort of mesmerized by the kid. So nobody's obeying him. Then he starts to confront Tommy, but then Tommy shakes his fist at Kirk, and and Shatner definitely kicks into scenery chewing mode and starts freaking out because he's losing the ability to command. Now, at this point, Spock kind of shakes off his trance. He kind of comes out of whatever Tommy had done to him. And then he removes Kirk from the bridge. And then in the turbo lift, Kirk starts having an existential crisis. But eventually he comes out of it, and they decide to go to auxiliary command and take control of the ship. But when they arrive at auxiliary control, I don't know why I can't say that today. He tells Scotty to assist them, but Scotty refuses, saying that if they do anything to tamper with the ship's instruments, it could destroy all of them. Kirk insists, and Scotty warns them that if they don't leave now, he and the other red shirts will kill them. So they try to do it by force, but Scotty and the red shirts attack Kirk and Spock and eventually drive them out of the control room. Now, Spock tells Kirk that the children are becoming a danger to the ship, and if they don't find a way to stop the aliens' influence over them, the children will have to be killed. And this is the thing with Spock, he's he, for all that Vulcans are like peaceful and everything, Spock usually he's not shy about resorting to lethal force. Back in Where No Man Has Gone Before, the pilot episode, he's like the first one to like say they need to get rid of Gary Mitchell. After Mitchell is affected by the energy field at the edge of the galaxy. There's a scene where he's reading the computer records at like an astonishing rate, just reading them really, really inhumanly fast, right? And Spock is immediately like, "We have to kill him, Jim," and it's like, "God, he hadn't even done anything yet." Okay, then they're confronted by Chekhov and a couple of red shirts. And Chekhov says they're supposed to take them to the brig. Kirk asks where this order's coming from, and he says it's coming from Starfleet Command or something like that. Kirk tries to convince Chekhov that these orders are false, but Chekhov warns that he will kill Kirk if he doesn't cooperate. So then again, a fight breaks out, but this time Kirk and Spock subdue Chekhov and the red shirts. Then Kirk has Spock take them all to the brig. Then he goes to the bridge himself, where Tommy is now in the captain's chair, and he confronts Tommy and Mary also and tells them they won't be going to Marcus 12. Then he asks where their mysterious friend is and asks why he won't show himself and asks if Gorgon is afraid. But Kirk says that he is afraid because if the crew saw him, they would see that he's a fraud. So he tells the children to call him, but they refuse to do so. So then Kirk, then Spock, who has arrived at the bridge by this point, he plays a recording of the children's chanting. And after they play the chanting, again, Gorgon appears. And he asks who has summoned him, and Kirk says that he did. And says that he has regained the ability to command, and he says that Gorgon being here is proof because he ordered Gorgon to appear. And then Gorgon says that his followers will not be stopped, and Kirk says that he can be stopped if they join together to fight him. And then he shows the children footage of them back on Triacus playing with together and playing with their parents. And the children initially are pleased. They start smiling and laughing at seeing all the play and seeing them together with their parents. And then they show images of their parents all dead. And at this point, the children's, they start to have an emotional reaction and they start crying. And Gorgon gets upset at this, telling the children that when they get to Marcus 12, they'll have many friends and they'll be unstoppable. And he says that anyone who opposes them must be annihilated. And then Kirk tells the children that without them to believe in him, Gorgon is powerless. And again, it's not clear where he's getting this from. He just sort of says it. But it seems to work because after he tells the children, that he's a fraud and not to believe in him, and I guess they stop believing in him, then Gorgon starts to change and he starts growing distorted and ugly, and eventually he fades away. And personally, I half expected him to start saying, I'm melting, but he doesn't do that. Now, after they leave, after he fades away, rather, right on cue, immediately McCoy shows up. And then he sees the children crying. And of course, he's happy to see that, saying that it's good that the children are now kind of expressing their grief, and confronting their emotions. And he says that, now that they're doing this, the next step will be getting them treatment for the trauma they've been through. And then Kirk orders the ship to Starbase 4. And it ends there. I'm sorry, it's Starnes, not Lawrence, Starnes. So, yeah, I mean, personally, it's not, I think, a particularly a good episode. A lot of issues with it. I'll give it a C+, I guess, as a grade. Okay. All right, let me take a drink of water here right quick. All right. And if I didn't say it before, again, as usual, I'm reading from Mark Cushman's book, These Are the Voyages, for all this behind-the-scenes information. All right, so writer Edward J. Lasko had been working in television for several years. Let me get to him here. There we go. Now, among his writing credits, he had written 4 episodes of Wild Wild West, 5 episodes of Laredo, 6 episodes of Dr. Kildare, and a staggering 33 episodes of Combat. But he had never tried his hand at science fiction. Regardless, Gene Roddenberry met with Lasko while interviewing candidates for the position of Star Trek's new script editor. Lasko had never worked in this capacity before, and he wound up not getting the job. The job for the script editor would go to Arthur Singer instead. Although Lasko would eventually become the script editor on Charlie's Angels about a decade later. Regardless, with those 33 script assignments for the character-driven Combat, Roddenberry wasn't going to deny him a meeting. Lasko did not get the job, but he did come away from the meeting with a story assignment, despite Roddenberry previously saying that only veteran Star Trek writers should be put to work. Oh, have you got it, Rogues? Okay, yeah, it's got a lot of information, a lot of really interesting stuff. Uh, and some of it I already knew, but I mean, I've learned so much from reading the book. Particularly, just the continual struggles they had just getting scripts. And what a struggle that was for them. Now, the idea that Lasko pitched about children manipulated by an incarnation of pure evil and using the power given to them to unleash the hidden fears buried deep in the psyche of the Star Trek regulars was too intriguing to ignore. Another plus for Lasko was that he had brought a story treatment to the meeting, giving Roddenberry a free look at his writing style in regard to the characters and format of Star Trek. Roddenberry was impressed by Lasko's daring. Before issuing a contract, though, Roddenberry asked his assistant to do a little checking up on Lasko and finding out what kind of a person he was to work with. And the report came back saying that he was very good at straight drama, but sophisticated drama he struggled with. But Roddenberry was apparently more interested in straight drama, or perhaps he just knew that NBC would be. So on March 6th of 68, Lasko was given a contract for one Star Trek script. Or one episode, I should say, one script job. So Lasko's revised outline reflecting the changes that he had been asked to make after having a story meeting with Roddenberry and co-producer Robert Justman was dated March 11th. In this draft, the children are found on Triakis and are, quote, unharmed but frightened, hungry, and generally in a state of shock. Later on the Enterprise, and while summoning the evil Gorgon, Lasko wrote, quote, there appears in the circle before them a phosphorus glowing figure of an angel-like creature, nearly formless, yet gentle and pleasant to look upon. This angel is the embodiment of their combined thoughts. His name is Gorgon. He speaks gently to the children, lauding them for following his orders so well. He praises them for believing in him. And of course, Gorgon is a term that originates from Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, Medusa, the woman who had the serpents for hair who could turn people to stone, she was one of three sisters, actually. And the three sisters, they were collectively referred to as the Gorgons. Okay. Now, 2 days later, Lasko mailed his outline to Paramount, and Robert Justman wrote to Roddenberry, quote, this is very good. It should really hit people in an emotional way if we handle the property correctly. Justman was right about the good premise, and he also suggested that Vince McAveety would be a good person to direct it. And Vincent McAveety had directed Miri. That was the first season episode, which also featured kids heavily in the episode. And McAveety, who was a no-holds-barred director with over 50 Westerns to his credit, always seemed to maintain control over the cast, inducing believable action and reaction over embarrassing histrionics. And Rogue says, I also watched the last two-part episodes of Star Trek Continues with the Romulan commander. Yeah, so you check that out, huh? Yeah, it is really good, isn't it? Man, it is so good. Um, Yeah, I can't say enough good stuff about it. I'd put that two-parter at the end up against almost anything Star Trek related, movies, TV. I'd say it's almost up there with like Best of Both Worlds. And actually, it's probably better than some two-parters that have been done, like what was it, Time's Arrow? The one where they go back to San Francisco or whatever. Yeah, I'd say it's probably better than that one, definitely. That one always was weird to me because it felt more like a Doctor Who episode, or a Doctor Who plot rather than a Star Trek plot. I don't know. Okay. Now, again, there's the usual memos back and forth wanting script changes. And as usual, I'm not going to go through all of it because it would be kind of tedious and take too long. Now, at this point, the story did not involve the children having the ability to actually control people's minds. The full extent of their powers was to unleash the characters' inner fears. These fears then would influence the behavior and, if need be, bring about the downfall of Gorgon's enemies. Lasco turned in a free rewrite of his story dated March 22nd. This one was sent to NBC. The network responded favorably and gave permission to proceed with the teleplay, although with words of caution about depicting any graphic action which might seem traumatic to the children in the story or to children watching at home. This go ahead was given on March 27th. 5 days later, Fred Freiberger came in and took over for Gene Roddenberry as the show's showrunner. Now, this version of the script was darker than what was filmed, and therefore, story wise, it was more effective. When Kirk and his landing party find the bodies of the researchers on Triakis, all dead from mass suicide, Lasco wrote that the Enterprise men hear a collective whimper. Then they turn around and they find the 5 children who are all kind of ragged and terrified. So they're more obviously traumatized and kind of in grief stricken over what has happened. Unlike in the actual episode where they're kind of oblivious to it all. This was the tone of Lasco's early script throughout. It had the potential of being both terrifying and profoundly sad, and all the children were described as being no older than 8 years old. If the tone had stayed as presented here, and The Children Shall Lead would have been a much talked about episode of Star Trek. As it turned out, it is a much talked about episode, but for all the wrong reasons. So, and one of the things is that Freiberger wanted he wanted the show to be lighter in tone, and so he asked for rewrites. Yeah, among other things, he was concerned that the tone of the script would be too dark. He'd been told by NBC that recent research indicated that women were frightened by outer space stories. With a new time slot, the male demographic alone was not going to be enough to withstand the competition on Friday nights, so more female viewers were needed. To Freiberger's thinking, that meant more love stories, and as Roddenberry had also thought, stories featuring children, but not children who whimper in shock and who are ragged, dirty, and terrified as they look upon the corpses of their dead parents. So he felt that the script was too graphic and too unpleasant. Lasco was given additional Star Trek scripts to read to help him familiarize himself with the regular characters and their voices in order to write them more accurately. He then turned in another draft. And Freiberger took a look at it and basically wrote to Roddenberry and said, we're going to have another rewrite on this, because he still hasn't really got it where we need it. At this point, Roddenberry suggested handing the script off to John Meredith Lucas or another writer, Chester Krumholtz, saying that they were both good at doing fast rewrites. But Freiberger didn't have the money to pay for a rewrite, so he asked Lasco to go over it again. The story had to be scary, but not too scary. One suggestion was to have the kids in denial and therefore not react to the gruesome sight of their dead parents. A further suggestion was to make the gruesome sight less gruesome. Suicide, after all, doesn't have to be bloody, at least not on TV. And so it was at this point that they wrote in the whole thing of the kids basically being carefree and playing when the Enterprise crew beamed down. So Lasco did another rewrite. This was his third draft. And it was felt like this wasn't quite it either. So Lasco was called in for yet another story meeting. Freiberger wanted a fourth draft, which would count as Lasco's official second draft, fulfilling his contract and thereby releasing the final payment. What was needed was something for Kirk to respond to, something to unnerve him as the face in the mirror in this. Okay, and so in one of the earlier drafts, instead of daggers, that those daggers on the screen in early versions of the draft, Sulu freaks out because he sees a snake on the control panel, and he won't go near it and to change the ship's course. Also, something better was needed to terrorize Sulu, something bigger, such as seeing daggers on the main viewing screen, which had the ability to destroy the Enterprise if Sulu took his focus off his controls. And Uhura needed to convey to the audience that she wasn't merely worried about looking old. And so some lines were added in where she says, "I'm seeing my own death." And it had to be understood that the children did not just release fears in each of the crew, but could also effectively distort the crew's minds with a combination of optical illusions and feelings of anxiety, anger, and paranoia. Now, Lasco's final handling of the script, which was converted into the yellow cover first draft on June 19th, was sent to Kellum DeForest Research for research coverage. And the response from Joan Pierce at DeForest was 6 pages of complaints. As Bijou Trimble recalls, quote, anything you got from Kellum DeForest research was probably from Joan Pierce. She had a photographic memory. She could actually remember everything she had ever read, and her memos were hysterical. She was extremely caustic. So Pierce's notes included, among other things, quote, where the script said the Enterprise was hovering or unmoving, the Enterprise is not hovering, it is in orbit. Regarding one of the dead scientists who appears to have shot himself with a phaser, this does not conform with the usual presentation of the phaser. When the phasers kill someone, the victim is disintegrated. When Spock and Kirk watched the tape of the parents prior to the mass suicide playing with their children, the script called for Spock to smile. And Pierce responded Spock would not do this, especially in light of the seriousness of the situation. When Lasco had Spock say evil seeks to maintain power by the suppression of truth, she objected to this, saying, this is a totally unscientific attitude. This is not Spock talking. This is superstitious metaphysical nonsense. When Spock tells Kirk the destroyers were themselves destroyed, Joan Pierce wrote, by what, may one ask? And when Spock says a force of evil, Pierce wrote, a force of evil is an unspockian thing to say, and an error in logic, namely the personification of an abstraction. Spock might recount such a tale as folklore, but not without indicating his own disbeliefs. The Spock we all know and love would not say this sort of thing. And Rogues 1138 says, some compare this episode to the film Space Children. Yeah, it mentioned that earlier that may have been one of the influences. Yeah, I haven't seen that either. So I don't know what it's about. But I don't know. That might be worth checking out sometime. In all his years, Fred Freiberger had never encountered a force as stern as Joan Pierce. But then he encountered another force, Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy recalled, quote, I went to Fred Freiberger and said, well, we got some problems with the script. And he said, the script is going to be what Mary should have been. Well, Mary was a lovely story, beautifully told and beautifully played. and we all loved Miri as an episode, and he was saying that Miri was a piece of trash. So basically, there was a breakdown of communication, and that's when death starts to set in. I don't know. I'm not that crazy about Miri. Um, it's not a terrible episode, but it's definitely one of the weaker ones, in my opinion. And it's not necessarily because there are children in it, although that doesn't help. So at this point, Fred Freiberger had Arthur Singer, the story editor, take over the rewriting. One good ad was the scene where Kirk orders the two security men to beam down to the planet, then discovers they were beamed into space. Freiberger's idea to allow the children to plant ideas in the minds of the crew allowed this, along with some less successful plot points. All in all, Arthur Singer did not have his best moment behind the typewriter for Star Trek. The characterizations in Singer's rewrite, excuse me, not Stinger. Singer's rewrite of And the Children Shall Lead, as with the consecutive page revisions by Fred Freiberger, remained shallow, the action remained awkward, and the dialogue remained mostly wooden. Perhaps the worst instance of wooden dialogue comes from the mouth of Gorgon. Even an experienced and talented actor could not have made this dialogue sound good, and Melvin Belli was a lawyer, not an actor. Another problem was that the characterizations of the Star Trek regulars were not quite right. With the previous four scripts, Freiberger and Singer were working over material from writers who knew the show and how his characters spoke. But tidying up after Edward J. Lasko was a challenge the new producer and new script editor were simply not prepared for. Fred Freiberger and Arthur Singer had never done science fiction before, said Dorothy Fontana. Freiberger had just come off of Iron Horse, a Western starring Dale Robertson. Neither he nor Singer really understood science fiction. It was not a Western or a cop show in sci-fi disguise. One member of the crew even told me that at one point Singer came down to the set, looked at the transporter, and said, "So what does this thing do again?" Now, Robert Justman originally recommended Vince McAveety to direct. McAveety had done well with Star Trek's other show, which featured children, Miri, but then the talented and much admired director took 7 days to finish Spectre of the Gun. All four of the third year episodes were now exceeding their planned budgets. With this fifth one, it was important for Freiberger and Justman to send a clear message to Douglas Kramer at Paramount that Star Trek could and would live within its mandated 6-day production schedule and within its budget. Therefore, McAveety was out. Now, Michael O'Herlihy, who directed the first season episode Tomorrow Is Yesterday, was given a contract to direct And the Children Shall Lead. He was excellent with child actors, as he had been a contract director for Walt Disney Production for years. But O'Herlihy had to drop out from this episode, as well as from The Paradise Syndrome, when he was called in by Disney to do a Western. And that opened the door for someone completely new to come in and direct. And that person would be Marvin Chomsky. So in an interview for this book, Chomsky said, quote, "I knew Bob Justman, who had been involved in some of the things I'd done, and he said, 'How'd you like to do a Star Trek?' And I said, 'Why not?' I was trained basically by Herb Brodkin, who is the producer of The Defenders and The Nurses in New York, and the idea of overtime or an extra day on set was blasphemous. I became a fireman very early on in my career. It was the kind of thing where they would say, if we don't have much money and we don't have much time, get Marvin to do it." Chomsky had worked his way up in television, beginning in New York as a set decorator and art director, then advancing to associate producer in various programs, and in 1964 as a director for the CBS drama The Nurses. In 1965, Chomsky made his way west to work as an art director on Gunsmoke and an associate producer on the short-lived sitcom Run Buddy Run, which I've never heard of. He served as an associate producer on a 1966 sci-fi movie, called The Bubble, which was released in three-dimensional space vision. Quote, "My background as a set director taught me a few things about directing for TV. I'd been watching the directors use up valuable time getting their coverage of a dialogue scene by shooting in three different directions. It occurred to me, instead of taking time to move the camera and change the lighting, why not just rotate the desk, change a few things in the background, and then turn the actors? A wall can appear to be three different walls with a little decorating, and that takes far less time than changing the lighting. So Chomsky's economic thinking at Gunsmoke got him bumped up into the director's chair for that series in 1966, and then again the following year on Wild Wild West. Along with his money-saving ideas, Chomsky had gained experience directing child actors, or at least teenagers, when he helmed the 1967 pilot for a series called Maya, which starred Jay North, aka Dennis the Menace, and soon to be, okay, I'll skip that part. So at the age of 38 years old, Chomsky received his invitation to try his hand directing Star Trek. Okay, now Chomsky had a different approach to directing than most TV directors. Rather than picking actors and having them come in and read scripts, and perform for him, Chomsky said that he would just invite the actors in and he would just sit and talk with them and have a conversation and basically decide if he could develop a rapport with them and if he'd enjoy working with them. All right, let me take a drink of water right quick. I'm sorry, I didn't realize my mic was muted. Yeah, so it was unintentionally hilarious. I'm sorry, I'd been talking for a while here. So let me start over. So they started the casting, and this kid here, this is Craig Hunley. So he played Tommy. And Tommy, this actor, he actually had already appeared on Star Trek. He appeared playing Kirk's nephew in Operation Annihilate back in the first season. So this is actually his second episode. And this kid, he was actually a very talented piano player, jazz piano player, as it turns out. And he actually had his own band called the Craig Hundley Trio. And so they appeared on a TV show called Showcase 68, which was, I guess, kind of like American Idol, one of those competition shows we have now where, basically bands would go on this show and perform, and then the winner would get like a gig or something like that. And they appeared on the show in June of 68. And that led to them getting several club dates around Los Angeles. Let's see. Now, around the time of filming of this Star Trek episode, the trio released their first album, which was titled Arrival of a Young Giant. Huh, not very modest. Variety in its review said, quote, Craig Hundley is a young teenage pianist whose jazz style has garnered considerable attention. In this set, Hundley, playing with an equally young bassist and drummer, gives a sample of his polished swing pianistics. What a word, pianistics. Most remarkably, perhaps, is the fact that Hundley has leaped over rock completely and harkened back to an early era of jazz music. Now, regarding his club engagements around Los Angeles, Hundley said, the real thrill for me was that people in the show, Leonard Nimoy and especially Bill Shatner, would come out and cheer me on. Now, then Pamela Ferdin played Mary. See if I can get that's her on the left there, of course. See if I can find a closer. There she is. Now, she was 9 at this time, and she had already performed in shows such as The Andy Griffith Show, Bewitched, My Three Sons, Family Affair, and The Monkees, to name just a few. And Pamela Ferdin was also the original voice of Lucy in the Peanuts animated specials. And at the time she did Star Trek, she was also appearing regularly on the CBS sitcom Blondie, which was based on the comic strip, playing Blondie's daughter. And I definitely remember her. She this is in the late '60s, but she was on TV in the '70s too. Actually, well, I'll get to that in a second here. Let me keep going. So, interviewed by L. Wayne Hicks for the website tvparty.com, Ferdin said, quote, I never dreamed of being an actress. I didn't even want to be an actress. My mom just put me in the business. She was very strict and highly critical and a real taskmaster. So I couldn't contradict her. I just did what I was told. My agent at the time, who was pretty much the biggest young adult agent in Hollywood, said that not only was I her busiest client, but there were times when I was the busiest actor, regardless of age, as I was doing so many things at the same time. I was that girl that people might not remember my name, but they remember seeing my face at one time or another. As for Star Trek, Ferdin said, I remember watching a lot of Star Trek. I really remember the Horta episode. We humans don't realize that the animals we share this planet with have feelings, sense pain, and anxiety, and have the same nerve receptors that we do. Animals may not look like us, just like that living rock didn't, but they also have feelings like we do. Okay, now Brian Tachi, age 9, played Ray. Let me see if I can find a good image of him here. There he is. So he was 9. He played Ray. He had just appeared in an episode of a hit sitcom called He and She. Tachi went on to have a successful career as both an actor and a voiceover artist, and would even return to Star Trek. He also appeared in the Star Trek Next Generation episode Night Terrors. And if you remember that one, that's the one where they're having nightmares and all that. It's a pretty good episode. And he actually also worked with Pamela Ferdin again. They both were in the 1977. They both appeared on the Saturday morning sci-fi show Space Academy. And that's probably where I remember her from, mainly. And they starred on that show alongside Jonathan Harris, who, of course, was Dr. Smith on Lost in Space. There was Space Academy, and then around that same time, there was, what was it, Jason of Star Command, which was around that same time. And that show it was very similar, but it had James Doohan on it. And I think I get them mixed up sometimes. But anyway, Ferdin said, quote, that was a great show. That was on Saturday morning. It was kind of billed as the first dramatic adult format show for kids. It was basically like Star Trek Junior, The Next Generation, but all the people in it were teenagers or young adults. And then let's see. Okay, now I don't have a picture of him here, but see if I can find him. Okay, so the kid here on the end, the little boy with the brown hair. So this is actually Melvin Belli's son, Caesar Belli. He was 11, and of course, Melvin Belli was his father. He had no real interest in acting. And he wound up eventually following in his father's footsteps and becoming a lawyer. Now, let me back here. Okay. And so then this is Mark Robert Brown. He played Donald. He was 10 years old at the time. And he says, I'd already done I Spy, Andy Griffith, Please Don't Eat the Daisies, Family Affair, The Flying Nun, Bewitched, and The Monkees. Even more lucrative was the work that Brown was doing in commercials. He said, quote, I did commercials for Wonder Bread, McDonald's, Three Musketeers, Mattel, and even recorded the voice for a Mattel doll, the talking honey bear. You'd pull the string and you'd hear me say, I just love honey. Brown was excited to be asked to audition for Star Trek. He said, quote, first, like for so many people my age, it was a favorite show. I watched every episode. And second, I was well aware of what was in the news. So I got the importance underscore of the episodes, with Star Trek being at the forefront of so many social issues. Of the audition, Brown recalled, quote, there were about 5 or 6 competitors who were other young black children like myself that were doing some level of acting work. I remember when I came in that they spent more time setting it up and explaining the storyline to me. And they would describe it in ways such as the Gorgon, who is an angel who turns into a devil, and said, you're following this angel because he takes over your minds and makes you do things. And after the children were cast, Chomsky and casting director Joe DaGosta went to work casting the adult players. Now, Jason Wellman, who the NBC press release wrongly identified as one of the children, was booked to appear as Professor Starnes. Let me find him here. Well, if I can find him here. There he is. Okay. Hey, Gwagnar. Good to see you, man. Thanks for being here. And Rogue says she definitely, I guess you mean, what you mean, Pamela Ferdin looked familiar? Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember her on multiple things. Like I'm sure I would bet you money she probably did an episode of like Little House on the Prairie, or something, or The Waltons or something like that. Okay, so yeah, so James Wellman. So he was known. He had a stage background, and Wellman's instincts for television, based on his theatrical background, were not good here. Regardless, after a long career on the stage in England, Wellman would eventually be awarded the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire by the Queen for his contributions to entertainment. So I guess, I don't know if did that come with a knighthood? Like, did he become Sir James? But of course, the big surprise for this episode came with the casting of the story's villain, Gorgon, the friendly angel. And that was, of course, Melvin Belli. Let's see here. There he is. And of course, Melvin Belli was a lawyer who was quite famous at the time. The main thing he was known for is that he is the man who defended Jack Ruby after Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald. I think that's the thing that really kind of made his reputation. And after that, he handled a lot of high profile cases. He handled the whole. He defended the Rolling Stones after that whole thing at the concert in Altamont, where one of the Hell's Angels guys who they were using for security stabbed one of the guys at the concert to death. And I don't think he defended the perpetrator, but he defended the Rolling Stones who had hired him. Okay. Chomsky said Melvin Belli was kooky casting. I think he had mentioned to someone that he would like to appear as a guest star on some television show, and somebody put it all together. And the next thing I knew, Melvin Belli was the Lord of the Universe or whatever it was in this big gown and standing on my set. Melvin Belli said, quote, I honestly forget who called me. Somebody thought it would be a great idea to have me as the villain, and I accepted immediately. And casting director Joe DaGosta said that was not my idea. I didn't even support it because I hated hiring non-actors and taking away jobs from working actors. I resisted the casting for that reason. I made the call and I had to coordinate the deal, but that idea came from the production office. I guess it was probably Freiberger who came up with that. It was what we called stunt casting back then. They used to do that in TV to draw people to a show, and I have to admit it did create a lot of interest. Yeah, so it seems like this was Fred Freiberger's idea to bring him in. Belli, who was famous as a criminal defense lawyer, had been connected with several well publicized trials. He defended Jack Ruby and several other celebrity clients, including Mae West, Errol Flynn, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Muhammad Ali, and the Rolling Stones. Belli told an interviewer for Playboy magazine that if he hadn't become a lawyer, he might have chosen acting as a profession. 3 years later, at the age of 59, and with the character of Gorgon, he got his chance. Quote, Melvin Belli didn't know how to act, James Doohan fumed. How in the hell did he ever get the job? I don't know. Was he someone's friend? This is the sort of thing that went on in the third year when Gene wasn't looking after things. And Walter Koenig said, quote, to me, the most heinous violation Freiberger perpetrated was casting Melvin Belli in And the Children Shall Lead. That infuriated me because not only did it dilute the impact, whatever there was to begin with, but it took an acting job away from an actor. I was really upset about that. Okay, now production of this episode began on June 27th, 1968. And it's worth pointing out, by the way, at this point, that around this time, the Green Berets, the John Wayne film, The Green Berets, which had George Takei appearing in it, was now in theaters around this time. And of course, uh, I covered some of that back in, my streams on the second season. Takei originally was going to do filming on that movie and was only supposed to miss a couple of episodes. But I think because of like storms, like hurricanes and whatnot, filming was delayed significantly. So he wound up missing a big chunk of the season, like at least half the season, I think. And then he came back and Walter Koenig was there and he was like, what the heck? Who's this guy? Okay, now Mark David Brown, again, that's the kid playing Donald. There he is. So he said the first thing we child actors would always do is report into the school teacher. But it was different this time because we found out that our area for a schoolroom on the sound stage was part of the set where they did the ice cream scene. It was basically they had to actually take school lessons in the set where they did it was the rec room set or recreation deck. Let me bring that up here. Yeah. Yeah, this deck, this set here. It wasn't often that you got to actually have your school lessons on the set. They would usually put us in a trailer or somewhere in the corner of the stage. And even if it was on the set, it wouldn't have been a set like the Starship Enterprise. So we did exactly what you would expect. We were amazed. The teacher was saying, okay, you have to focus on your assignments. And we're going, look at that. That's the bridge. Look at all those buttons. Oh, look, there's the elevator doors. And let's see here. Okay, yeah. And then in the course of that first day, after a few hours of school, Leonard and Bill would come up and say, hey, run around the set, go and check it out. You're on the Starship Enterprise, so go have fun. And we did exactly that. We'd go running around the sound stage, our eyes popping out of our heads, saying, look at this, and oh, look at that, with the bridge or the sick bay or the engine room or holding a phaser. We had all been on sets before, and we were all familiar with them because the show was so popular. But being there was certainly awe-inspiring. All the other sets that I'd been on felt like a television show, but this felt like a movie set. Even with so many kids, Chomsky was still the metaphorical new kid on the block with the production crew, and he had less say over many aspects of the production. Look and feel of Star Trek, after all, had already been well established. He later said, quote, for my taste, the cinematographer, Jerry Finnerman, used too much colored lighting, and I told him that. I asked him to tone it down a bit, and he said, I am the cinematographer. And I said, okay, you want red, light it with red. Okay, now for the second day of filming, Brown was actually the first kid up on this day for his part in the auxiliary. Jesus, why can I say that auxiliary control room? Let's see, I can find that. Yeah, there he is. And he says, so in the engine room where Kirk is having the fight, and I'm behind this iron screen and I'm pumping my fist. I remember Shatner, Nimoy, and the director, and probably everybody being really encouraging. And I remember Shatner coming over to me and saying, "Hey, listen, it's okay. We're just playing at fighting, okay? But it's really just a fight for the story, and you're the one who is doing this. You're doing a great job, so just keep it up because you're being you're being an evil little kid right now." Regarding the series star, Brown said, I'd worked with some of the best in the television, like Sally Field and Debbie Reynolds and Bill Cosby. I had worked with consummate TV professionals, but the moment we hit the set, Leonard Nimoy and Bill Shatner came over to greet us. They talked to us and they treated us like adults. They knew they were interacting with children, but their approach was we're working here and we're all professionals. And in that sense, we're all equals. On one hand, it's call me Bill and call me Leonard. And hey, was the ice cream good or did you like this or like that? But then when it came time to work, it was all professional. And Brian Tachi, again, and that's the Asian boy. Where can I find? Let's see. Yeah, him. So he said, I remember William Shatner being very nice. He was so terrific to us. And I remember Nichelle Nichols being very nice to us. And Walter Koenig was always talking to us and telling us how we needed to behave on the sets. And Pamela Ferdin said, there she is. I didn't really have many friends because I was always working and surrounded by adults. So they were more like family members to me when I get to know them on a set. And they would kind of take care of me and be my surrogate parents. One of those surrogate parents, of course, was Marvin Chomsky, and he said, quote, I had directed children before, so that wasn't a problem. And these kids were all particularly bright. They knew the show and they knew what was going on, really. I mean, they knew the show better than I did. And then Caesar Belli, again, Melvin Belli's son here, he said that on the second day of filming, the ice cream, because there's a scene, and I didn't really show it because it wasn't important to the plot, but when they're on the recreation deck, the scene starts with Nurse Chapel giving them ice cream. And he mentions that actually the ice cream dispenser wasn't working right, it kept malfunctioning. Let's see. Okay, I'll skip ahead a little bit here. Okay, Mark David Brown talks about being in makeup and seeing them put Nimoy's ears on. He says, can you imagine? Wow, the first time I'm sitting there watching them putting on Spock's ears. And I've seen makeup done. I've seen people become old. I'd seen all kinds of stuff. But watching Spock get his ears was a landmark experience for me. It was so memorable. I thought I was used to that kind of stuff, but it was really fascinating to me. And as he sat in that chair, that makeup went on, Leonard's conversation began leaning more and more towards him being in character. At the same time, there were many instances where I was in his presence and he would break out of character with us because we were kids and just be Leonard. Those were things that were not in the Spock character. Those were aspects of Leonard. And at those times, he was wonderfully warm, compassionate, intelligent, funny, and a consummate professional. Just a wonderful man. And he would often segue back to the Spock character with some sort of logical humor. Pamela Ferdin, meanwhile, was more focused on William Shatner. She said, quote, I had a mad crush on William Shatner. It was my very first crush, really. I was his little shadow. When he would sit in the makeup chair, I would sit by him and talk with him the whole time. And he was very nice to me, but I'm sure he knew. Now, Eddie Paskey, let's see, go back to him. There he is. Always present as Shatner's lighting stand-in, as well as Lieutenant Leslie in over 50 episodes, recalled that the cast and crew were well aware of the penny pinching that was going on the show by this point. He said, quote, we were all glad to be back, but after about the fourth show, you could almost see that Gulf Western was just putting a noose around us. There was a tightness on the set, money-wise. The camaraderie was still there, still in force, but it was like a rag that you had wound up squeezing water out of it, and it stifled a lot of the creativity, I think. For example, if you look at the hallway scenes, if it wasn't a scene out of the files from the first season, it was pretty bare. It was like the ship was a ghost ship. There were supposed to be 400 people there, and if you were just walking down the hall, chances are you're going to have someone walking by you, or you're going to meet somebody in the doorway going in or out. But during the third season, none of that was there. They had very few extras called in unless they needed them for a specific shot. And I just don't know how much Fred Freiberger had to do with the script, but excuse me, some of those scripts were crap. Now, Chomsky said the regular characters were all predetermined. They had their own cookies, and that's what they were going to play. I don't know what that means. So I primarily dealt with the guest stars. As for the regulars, it was just a matter of working on staging. If I thought something was a little over the top, I would mention it and have a discussion, and sometimes I won and sometimes I lost. It was just that I felt it was a bit over the top sometimes, or could have been a little stronger, but we worked our way through it. Uh, I'm sure he wasn't talking about Shatner. Okay. Then finally, Melvin Belli came on set to do his part.
Chomsky said, let me see here. Let me bring him back up. So Chomsky said, quote, I remember him coming out for the camera rehearsal, and I said, action. And the first kid spoke his line of dialogue, and then Melvin responded, but he just started rambling. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Haven't you memorized this? And he said, no, I thought I'd just make it up as I go along. And I said, well, it's important to say it in the same way each time because the actor who speaks after you has to know when you're finished talking. Oh, he says. He wasn't sure about that, so I shot something else, and then he came back practically knowing what it was he was to do. We had to improvise something, and I'd use hand signals and signal the other actors when to pick up the pace or when to know that he was finishing or to cut him off. That was a very illuminating experience for me. Mark David Brown said, there was never this sense of, I'm Melvin Belli and I've got a starring role and I've got this important character and that's my son over there. We never really got that. What we got was that he was very appropriate and very professional, but there were times he seemed uncomfortable. He was clearly a fish out of water. He would make comments like, oh, I don't know how to approach this. Doing that character for him was more work and more effort than would have been for a lot of professional actors. As for the other cast members, even though some were enraged about the inclusion of a non professional in the episode, the celebrated lawyer said that he was treated with nothing but kindness. He said, quote, I enjoyed myself immensely and I was struck by the professionalism of William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and all the rest. They were all very professional and supportive, yet and imbued with a great sense of fun. So clearly they didn't let their frustration or anything show to him, which, was very kind of them, I think. And then also some of the kid actors, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but they mention how when they were on the sets, they were disappointed to find that, the set was just a set, like none of the buttons actually worked or did anything, and the doors, of course, the doors don't really open on their own. There was someone behind you, behind the wall pulling the doors open. And they were kind of disillusioned when they found that, oh yeah, this is all like camera tricks and stuff. It doesn't, this stuff doesn't really work. Now, Melvin Bell, I said, the most fun for me personally was my death scene. So let's get back to, yeah, where he starts mutating. Even though they had taken casts of my face much earlier, the makeup required this for the scene still took the better part of a morning. They would shoot for a time, then pause, then take me back to makeup to make me look more hideous. I remember they built up my nose with putty and made my jowls sag with each consecutive stage. Then it was back to the sound stage to shoot some more. The camera had to be tied down and left in one position for the entire morning. As for how Belli did, Chomsky, who admitted to having a nickname in the industry as Mr. Tact, said, quote, I think he did as well as he could. He just wanted to do it his way, which was making it up as he went along. It was obviously the way he did it in a courtroom. I just know that it was a great trial for me. Okay, now Chomsky did such a good job on this episode that he actually brought it in under budget, about $2,000 under budget, which was an exception. And he was only about 2 hours over on the time, 2 hours of overtime. And because of that, he would be brought back to direct other Star Trek episodes. Freiberger, defending his decision to cast Melvin Belli, said, quote, he wasn't the greatest actor, but he was very cooperative, using him as an exploitation shot to boost our ratings. He was fun to work with, but the ratings stayed the same. Okay, now this episode aired on October 11th, 1968, and it was second in the ratings with a 26% audience share, just a bit ahead of the ABC show Judd for the Defense, and which was at 24%, and first in the ratings again was the CBS Friday Night Movie with a 32% share. Mark David Brown and his family gathered around the TV to watch this episode when it aired. He said, "We knew when it was going to be on, and in preparation for that, we had to do our homework and we had to do our chores, and we had to help cook dinner, wash the dishes, and feed the pets. Yes, the TV show is coming on, but the reality is today is Friday, and you are still a 10-year-old who has class lessons to homework to do, and you have responsibilities. So I had to earn the privilege of watching myself on television. And then we would all sit down in the family room and watch a 26-inch color screen, which was very new at the time." Yeah, remember when like a 28-inch screen was a big TV? Remember those days? And I was very happy. I had joyful memories of the moments with my mom, my dad, sister, and myself sitting down to watch TV. When it came to Star Trek, there was a little greater sense of excitement because it was such a unique show and such a big show and such a positive show and such a different character for me to play. And I have a very vivid memory of the moment the show began, and you got the image of the universe and the planets, and the ship comes flying through, and you hear Kirk's voiceover saying, "Space, the final frontier." And I remember at the time this amazing grin of excitement inside and out, and literally thinking, wow, this is so cool. I'm on Star Trek and I'm going to watch me on Star Trek. Pamela Ferdin said, quote, "I really admired Leonard Nimoy's character of Spock. When I was filming the episode, I think he and his understanding of his character as a Vulcan led me into becoming a vegetarian and later a complete vegan. I was intrigued by the complexity of the Vulcans. They represented a culture that respected all life, whether it talked and walked or looked human or not. I was so taken with that philosophy that it has followed me throughout my life." And this is an interesting note. So we mentioned, Pamela Ferdin. She had a crush on William Shatner. Well, it turns out that Fred Freiberger, he had a young son named Ben, and Ben had a crush on Pamela Ferdin. It turns out. His Fred Freiberger's son said, quote, "I was 8 years old when And the Children Shall Lead first aired, and I loved this episode. Pamela Ferdin was in it, and I had such a crush on her. And I think I also liked that episode because I related to the kids in it." Leonard Nimoy, while enjoying working with the children, had issues with the script before it was ever filmed and said, quote, "It's one of our worst shows ever." William Shatner, though, said he called this episode unusual and high quality. Okay. Freiberger said, "It could have been a better show. I thought the idea was good, but it just wasn't as strong as it could have been." Brian Tachi said, "Whether it was the worst piece of doo-doo or not, I still think it was fun to do." And when asked his opinion, Marvin Chomsky said, quote, "As to which shows were more or less favored, I must quote Socrates. In a public forum, never admit which is your favorite child. I just publicly proclaim I love them all." Now, in his biography, Warp Factor, Walter Koenig wrote, "Melvin Belli was absolutely dreadful. He read his part the way people read nursery rhymes to small children." And finally, Melvin Belli said, "Once I was sitting in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel with fellow lawyer F. Lee Bailey." And F. Lee Bailey, what all, who all did he defend? He defended Patty Hearst. I remember he defended Patty Hearst. He was another famous lawyer, and actually, he was one of OJ's lawyers too. Um, and he said that to pass the time, we were sitting in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel, and we wondered which one of us was more famous. So to settle the issue, we made a bet. Whoever was recognized first would win the wager. Sure enough, a stranger came up and asked me if I was Melvin Belli. Pleased that I had now won the bet, I asked the man how he recognized me. Newspaper photos of one of my famous cases, perhaps, or some TV coverage of the Ruby trial? And he said, "No, I saw you on Star Trek." And Rogue says, "Yeah, director of Star Trek 5 liked this episode." Yeah, well, I mean, look, to be fair, a lot of what happened on Star Trek 5 wasn't really in Shatner's control. I mean, there were a lot of things going on with there was a workers' strike in Hollywood at the time and other stuff that kind of undermined the production. But really, the whole thing, just finding God, just from the beginning, was kind of whoa, hold on. Oop, sorry, I hit the wrong thing. But there were just too many other things going on that he wasn't in control of that undermined that production. Okay, so that's going to do it for this episode. Please do like the stream if you haven't already, and please do sub to the channel if you haven't. Now, I will not be doing a Trek Talk next week. Starting this Thursday, I'm going to be with my National Guard unit for about 9 or 10 days. So there will be no Trek Talk next week. Hopefully, I'll be back in 2 weeks. And at that time, I'll be doing Spock's Brain. So you have that to look forward to. I should, if I can, I will be back on Monday with J-Man, and the others for the Earth's Mightiest Mondays. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much going to be it. Thanks to everyone who showed up during the stream and those who will check it on a rewatch. And again, thanks for being here. I do appreciate it. And I will see you all next time. And have a good night.